know, something happens to your kids when they're at school, you want them to get the best possible care.
Yeah, absolutely. New at 6, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that schools have at least one registered nurse on staff. But the reality is that 60% of public schools nationwide have a part-time nurse, or maybe no nurse at all. Operation Education investigator Tolly Taylor is here. And Tolly, people tend to think nurses only deal with bumps and bruises.
Yeah, one school nurse told me one of the hardest parts of her job is dealing with all the misconceptions around what she does. A quarter of all children now suffer from some type of chronic illness, like diabetes or asthma. And it's school nurses who help keep them in class. They also address anti-bullying efforts, mental health promotion, sex education, and substance abuse.
Sometimes people will say, well, what do you do?
As a school nurse at Concord Oxbow Elementary and nursing coordinator for Concord Schools, Stacy Pavlovic is accustomed to people dramatically underestimating what she does.
People tend to think of, kids will have a stomach ache or scrape a knee, and sure, we're there for that too, but there's so much more.
But the days of school nurses only attending to bumps and bruises, if those days ever even existed, are gone.
The kinds of health problems we're seeing in schools has changed dramatically.
As the list of requirements for school nurses has gotten longer, there's now a nationwide shortage. Nationally, 39% of schools have a full-time nurse, 35% have a part-time nurse, and 25% don't have one at all. The Indiana Department of Education sent out a survey to public schools. Of those that responded, 32% had a part-time nurse or no nurse at all. And the ratio is one registered nurse to roughly every 1,000 students. That may sound reasonable until you consider what they're dealing with.
We see a lot of students with type 1 diabetes, seizure disorders, food allergies, and other severe allergies that may impact students during the day.
School nurses also treat students with mental health conditions, disabilities, concussions, gender transitions, tube feedings. The list goes on and on. Besides treatment, they coordinate health education programs for the entire school and coordinate care between students, parents, and doctors. I asked Pavlovic if she kept any data about nurse-student interactions. What she shared was stunning.
We saw in our 7 school buildings, all of our clinics with our 8 nurses, we saw 41,800 students.
To put that in perspective, when you divide 41,800 student visits by 180 days in the school year, that's 232 visits across all 7 schools each day. Divide that number by the 8 nurses working full-time at Concord Schools, and that's 29 visits for each nurse per day.
There is research to support that when a school nurse is in a building caring for students, their attendance increases, their test scores increase. They're more likely to graduate from high school because of this.
School nurses so vital in a lot of these schools, and you were sharing with us earlier that low-income schools, they're even more vital.
Yeah, Tanner was telling me that for a lot of these low-income students, a school nurse, that's the only access to health care that students have. But yet, school nurses are often the first thing cut in budgets.
Yeah, almost 42,000 visits to school nurses in Concord schools last year. That's just mind-blowing. That's a ton.
Right. I think that just underlines the importance of full-time nurses, right? It's tough to imagine a part-time nurse or a secretary getting to what amounts to 29 student visits per day per nurse
right.
if they're just part-time.
They don't have that time.
Right.
Yeah. All right, Tolly, very interesting. Thanks. Wednesday at 6, Tolly investigates where schools without a registered nurse turn instead, and why employing a school nurse can actually save a school money in the long run. If you have a story you'd like Tolly to look into, call our Operation Education Tips line at 574-344-2580 or email operationeducation@wsbt.com.
WSBT 22 News at 6.
A nationwide shortage of nurses could mean your kids are not getting the best care at school.
The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that schools have at least one registered nurse on staff. But roughly a third of Indiana public schools have a part-time nurse or even no nurse at all. Operation Education investigator Tolly Taylor is here. And Tolly, you looked at the money school nurses save their districts and what happens when there's no nurse at all.
School nurses train teachers, office staff, and bus drivers how to help kids in emergencies. And that's on top of everything they do for students. Concord Schools recorded nearly 42,000 student visits last year. For the 8 full-time nurses on staff, that's about 29 visits each day.
If you can imagine all of the childhood illnesses that there are, illnesses, health conditions, all of those students come to school.
That's how Stacy Pavlovic tries to explain what she does anytime she's asked. She's a school nurse at Concord's Oxbow Elementary, and the nursing coordinator for the district. She says many people think she treats bumps and bruises. Another nurse told me how she treats a student with a chronic illness, like type 1 diabetes.
We may see them multiple times every single day. We may see them every single time they prick their finger to determine what their blood sugar level is and help them decide based on the foods they're about to consume.
The process is so involved, it takes her several minutes just to describe the care she provides. All of this is second nature for Tanner, even though she's still describing what it takes just to care for one student with type 1 diabetes. And though she's still a full-time school nurse, her job is to oversee 3 different schools in her district. So if a student at one school is sick, there's a 66% chance Tanner will be at one of the other 2 schools. Pavlovic tells me she thinks school nurses who are responsible for multiple schools are often the most unhappy.
It would be so stressful, very stressful, and I think that contributes actually to the nursing shortage, is the high level of stress.
According to the Indiana Department of Education, 32% of public schools have a part-time nurse or no nurse at all. Why doesn't every school have a full-time nurse? Funding is tight, and since the state legislature doesn't specifically earmark money for school nurses, school boards are left with a difficult decision. Some choose to eliminate full-time nurses. But Lori Combe, the National Association of School Nurses president, pointed to a 2009-2010 study that shows the value of school nurses. For every dollar spent on a nurse's salary, the district saved $2.22 in school administrator time, lost instruction time, lost parent time at work, and medical dollars. And when schools have secretaries or other non-registered nurse staff take on the role, there's more than just money to consider.
There's research to show that there's more errors when non-nurse personnel are the ones administering medication.
I sampled a small group of local schools to see their school nurse situations. 3 of the 5 districts have full-time nurses, 2 reported using secretaries or having no one at all. I asked Pavlovic to quantify the value of school nurses. Her answer left no doubt.
We're here supporting staff, students, parents with so many different medical needs that we're invaluable.
Despite well-publicized budget cuts, South Bend schools recently let me know that they have full-time nurses at every school. And I want to emphasize, most of the school districts don't want to get rid of their full-time nurses. They're often forced to because of budget cuts.
But Tali, what happens to these schools that don't even have the part-time nurses?
Yeah, the nurses I spoke to told me that often schools will have someone like a secretary or someone else take on a nurse's responsibilities. But they say the problem with that is secretaries aren't allowed to assess what's wrong with a student if a student comes to them. All they can do is call a parent or dial 911.
And let the parents make the decision.
Exactly.
Yeah, Tali, thank you very much. All right, Monday night at 6, we are investigating a relatively new trend in schools that's designed to keep your kids safe. But some worry it could be creating fear. If you have a story that you would like Tali to look into, call our Operation Education Tips line. The number is right there on your screen, 574-344-2580, or you can email operationeducation@wsbt.com.